I remember the day started like any other, the kind of still, sun-drenched Tuesday that makes you forget the world outside your small slice of suburban paradise even exists. I was sitting on my back porch, the smell of freshly cut grass from my neighbor's lawn mixing with the strong, slightly bitter aroma of my third cup of coffee. I'd been retired from the force for almost 5 years, and the quiet rhythm of civilian life had finally settled over me. No frantic sirens, no adrenaline-spiking calls, just the predictable comfort of my own little world. My house, a modest but sturdy ranch, sat right on the edge of the Stone Creek Estate's development, but thankfully I was on the outside, separated by a meticulously maintained decorative stone wall. I'd bought my property well before the HOA annexed the adjacent land, and I'd always considered that boundary my first line of defense against the pettiness and overreach I'd heard about from the folks inside Stone Creek. I was planning to spend the afternoon finally cleaning and re-oiling my collection, a ritual I found deeply therapeutic, a way to stay connected to the professionalism and discipline I'd cultivated over 2 decades on the street. My collection wasn't just a hobby. It was a carefully curated, legally registered arsenal, representing years of dedication to marksmanship, and honestly, a non-negotiable part of my personal security as a former officer who'd put away some very bad people. I got up, stretched, and headed inside, the cool interior a welcome break from the late spring heat, already feeling that familiar, satisfying anticipation of breaking down the mechanisms, piece by shiny piece, and returning them to pristine condition in the gun safe. The safe itself was a fortress bolted deep into the concrete foundation of my utility room, accessible only by a biometric scanner and a 6-digit code that had been burned into my memory since the day I installed it. That sense of peace shattered the instant I stepped into the utility room. The air was thick with the faint, metallic scent of ozone and freshly disturbed concrete dust, a smell that immediately sent a spike of cold, pure alarm straight down my spine. I didn't need to see the safe to know something was wrong. My training kicked in instantly, every muscle tensing, every sound outside the house suddenly magnified and scrutinized. My eyes snapped to the corner where the heavy-duty gun safe had stood for years, and where there was now only a gaping, raw-edged hole in the cinderblock wall, the ripped bolts hanging uselessly from the jagged edges of the concrete. The safe was gone. Not opened, not tampered with, it had been physically removed, leaving behind a silent testament to a massive, professional breach of my security. I moved forward cautiously, my hand instinctively going to my hip, and finding nothing, of course, because my personal carry was in the safe, adding another layer of chilling realization to the immediate crushing weight of the violation. I swept the room, my cop senses on high alert, noting the absence of forced entry on the main doors and windows, confirming that whoever did this came through the wall and had likely cased the place for weeks. As I processed the sheer audacity and scale of the operation, I noticed a single, pristine white envelope lying on the newly exposed concrete floor, standing out against the grey dust like a bad joke. My heart pounded a furious rhythm against my ribs as I snatched it up, my hands trembling not from fear, but from a profound, incandescent rage that I hadn't felt since my rookie days. I tore open the envelope, the sharp, crinkling sound echoing unnaturally loud in the suddenly silent house. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a professionally printed letterhead that I recognized with a sickening lurch. Stone Creek Estates Homeowners Association. My mind reeled. They had no jurisdiction here. They had no right to my property. I wasn't even in their ridiculous, overpriced development. I scanned the letter, the perfectly aligned, clinical font delivering a message that was nothing short of an active threat and a declaration of war. It cited an obscure, completely fabricated community safety and wellness initiative that supposedly granted them the right to temporarily secure all high-risk personal items within a 100-foot radius of the development's border, effective immediately due to a recent public safety advisory. The final paragraph, signed with a flourish by the HOA president, a woman named Beverly Jenkins, informed me that my assets would be returned only after I submitted to a full psychological and safety review by their appointed committee. The blood drained from my face, replaced by the burning heat of an injustice so monumental, so utterly stupid, that I momentarily forgot how to breathe. This wasn't a random burglary, this was an institutional theft, a bizarre megalomaniacal overreach by a handful of neighborhood tyrants. The sheer contempt they held for the law, for property rights, and for me, a decorated retired police officer, was an insult that demanded immediate, overwhelming retribution. I spent the next hour doing what 20 years on the force taught me to do before I let rage take the wheel. I got cold, methodical, and prepared. I made 3 calls, one to my former precinct captain, who I knew would appreciate the sheer absurdity of the situation, one to a reliable investigative journalist acquaintance, and one to my attorney, who specialized in civil rights and property disputes, and who, frankly, loved a good fight against institutional incompetence. As I spoke, packing the length of my house, the anger coalesced into a sharp, focused instrument. This wasn't just about my property. This was about jurisdiction, authority, and the fundamental right to self-defense, all of which these suburban dictators had unilaterally decided to erase with a single, arrogant letterhead. I dressed quickly, pulling on a dark, no-nonsense tactical jacket over a plain t-shirt, lacing up my heavy-duty patrol boots. The sight of them, even after all these years, brought a small measure of my old confidence back. I drove the short distance to the main entrance of Stone Creek Estates, the perfectly manicured hedges and ridiculously ornate gate already filling me with a visceral disgust. This wasn't a negotiation, this was a retrieval mission, and I wasn't going to be asking nicely. I parked my unmarked SUV directly in front of the gate, blocking the entrance and hitting the emergency flashers, the bright yellow light strobing mockingly against the polished brass of the HOA's pretentious entryway plaque. Stepping out, I could already feel the heavy, oppressive silence of the perfectly controlled neighborhood pressing in on me, broken only by the chirping of meticulously placed, almost certainly monitored security cameras. I walked purposefully to the guard shack, a tiny, air-conditioned box manned by a bored-looking teenager in a too-big uniform, and slapped the fraudulent letter down on the counter with a loud thwack. "I need to speak to Beverly Jenkins, the HOA president, right now," I stated, my voice dangerously low and level, cutting through the canned, tinny music playing in the shack. My internal radar was scanning the periphery, taking in the details. The slow, nosy faces already beginning to peek out from behind plantation shutters in the nearby homes. The way the guard's eyes went wide and darted nervously to the silent alarm button. The kid stammered something about appointments and policy, but I cut him off, my palm slamming flat onto the counter, right next to the letter. "Listen to me, kid. This is no longer a civil matter. Your boss authorized the burglary of a former police officer's home and the theft of his legally registered firearms. You tell Beverly she has 60 seconds to get her over-entitled backside out here, or I'm moving from calling the police to calling the FBI on the grounds of armed conspiracy and interstate theft. Choose wisely." The threat hit home, the sheer weight of the words making the teenager visibly pale. He fumbled with the intercom, his voice a panicked squeak as he radioed his superior. Within 2 minutes, a small victory for my urgency, the door of the main HOA community center, a monstrosity of mock colonial architecture, burst open and out marched Beverly Jenkins, flanked by 2 men in ill-fitting, off-the-shelf security vests that screamed, "Rent a cop." Beverly was exactly as I pictured, coiffed hair, a silk blouse, and an expression of absolutely unwavering, self-appointed superiority. She stopped dead in her tracks, her manicured fingers tightly clutching a clipboard, her eyes narrowing as they took in my imposing figure and the strategically parked SUV. "What is the meaning of this, sir? You are disrupting community access," she drawled, her voice dripping with the patronizing tone of someone used to being automatically obeyed. Her gaze dismissed me as a mere annoyance, a piece of trash to be swept up by her hired muscle. The 2 uniformed men took a hesitant step forward, their hands hovering near their empty holsters, a detail my cop's eye didn't miss. I took a single, deliberate step forward, my shadow falling across Beverly's expensive shoes, and didn't bother to raise my voice. "The meaning, Mrs. Jenkins, is that you broke into my house, the one you don't have jurisdiction over, and you stole my personal property, a violation that carries significant federal prison time. I want my firearms back right now, and I want the names of every person involved in the planning and execution of this criminal act." Beverly's composure finally cracked, replaced by a flash of genuine fear mixed with arrogant indignation. "You're mistaken, sir. We acted well within our authority under the safety initiative. Your home is too close to our boundary, and we have a right to protect our community from items that pose a risk." She gestured wildly towards my property across the wall, trying to rally the now growing crowd of curious, gossiping neighbors who were starting to gather at the fence line and on their balconies. She was attempting to play to her audience, seeking validation for her absurd power trip, but I wasn't done. I reached into my jacket, pulling out my old, worn police badge, the metal shining dully in the sun, and held it up for all to see. The movement was instant and dramatic. The buzzing crowd went dead silent, and Beverly's haughty expression evaporated completely. The 2 rent-a-cops froze like deer in headlights, their pretense of authority instantly crumbling into dust. The silence that fell over the entrance of Stone Creek Estates was absolute, broken only by the distant, echoing sound of a police siren, which I realized with a grim satisfaction was likely my former captain making a grand entrance. I held my badge steady, the weighty piece of polished metal now serving as the ultimate, undeniable truth in this ridiculous theater of false power. The crowd of neighbors, initially gawkers, were now murmuring, their faces shifting from curiosity to a collective realization that they were witnessing something far more serious than a typical neighborhood spat. Beverly Jenkins, her face a mask of rapidly cycling emotions, from indignation to confusion to sheer unadulterated terror, stared at the badge, then back at me, the silk of her blouse seemingly losing its crispness. You're a cop," she stammered, the realization finally connecting in her privileged brain. The arrogance was completely gone, replaced by the naked, sickening fear of someone who just realized they made a powerful, dangerous enemy. Her two security goons had already taken a strategic 3 steps back, suddenly finding the curb much more interesting than the confrontation. I didn't let her regain her footing, pressing the advantage of the sudden, devastating silence. Retired Detective Sergeant Thomas MacDougall, 23 years with the City PD, currently serving in an advisory capacity to federal law enforcement agencies on matters of organized theft. You just broke federal law, Mrs. Jenkins. You performed an illegal, armed break-in, and you stole registered property from a former officer. That's a felony. And just so we're clear, I continued, my voice dropping to a gravelly, inescapable whisper that carried clearly over the astonished crowd, I don't live here. You had absolutely zero jurisdiction. This wasn't a safety initiative. It was a criminal conspiracy, and now, your entire HOA is implicated. The sound of the approaching sirens became a wail, and a black and white patrol car, not one of the local county cruisers, but a City PD unit, screeched to a halt behind my SUV. My old captain, Frank Rodriguez, a man built like a fire hydrant, stepped out, taking in the scene with a practiced, knowing smirk that told me he was enjoying this immensely. He walked straight toward me, nodding a brief greeting before turning his full, intimidating attention onto Beverly Jenkins, who was now visibly shaking. "Ma'am," Frank stated, his voice booming with legitimate authority, "my former colleague has just provided me with evidence of a massive property theft and home invasion, perpetrated under the fraudulent guise of a homeowners association. I am now officially treating this location as a crime scene. Where are the firearms?" Beverly completely collapsed. The sheer weight of the genuine authority, the loss of her audience, and the explicit threat of jail time broke her meticulously composed facade. She pointed a trembling finger toward the back of the HOA facility. The storage locker, in the maintenance shed. We were going to move them later. We just wanted to make a point, she wailed, her voice cracking with self-pity. Utterly missing the magnitude of her crime, my attorney, bless his efficient heart, arrived seconds later in an expensive black sedan, stepping out with a manila folder already tucked under his arm, his expression one of pure predatory focus. He didn't even acknowledge Beverly, walking straight past her to Frank. "Captain, I believe the immediate return of my client's property is non-negotiable. Furthermore, we will be filing civil charges for emotional distress, property damage to the tune of $5,000 to his wall, and a preliminary punitive charge of $1 million for false imprisonment and reckless endangerment of a law enforcement professional." The resolution was swift and brutal. Frank and 2 newly arrived county deputies, accompanied by a now thoroughly deflated and subservient Beverly, recovered my gun safe, dented but mostly intact, from the maintenance shed. The safe was a monstrous weight, a testament to the effort the thieves had expended, proving this was a planned, organized operation. My attorney ensured I had a legally witnessed receipt for the property's return before the officers even left the premises. Beverly Jenkins was detained, not arrested, on the scene. A small victory for her connections, perhaps, but Frank made it abundantly clear that a full criminal investigation was being opened, focusing on the conspiracy charges, with federal overtones thanks to the interstate nature of the firearms. The lasting consequence was the most satisfying. The investigative journalist I'd called showed up just as the police were wrapping up, and the story broke nationally within 24 hours. HOA president accused of armed burglary against former cop, complete with pictures of the damaged wall and my shining badge. The resulting publicity was a public relations disaster of epic proportions for Stone Creek Estates. Beverly Jenkins was not only removed from her position, but was soon facing a barrage of lawsuits from her own neighbors, rightfully terrified that the HOA's liability insurance wouldn't cover the criminal acts. The HOA itself dissolved within 6 months, unable to withstand the legal costs, the public scorn, and the sheer impossibility of selling a home in a neighborhood with a federal criminal investigation hanging over it. I used the initial settlement from the civil suit, which we won handily, to upgrade my safe, install a new unbreachable security system, and put up a very large, very clear sign on my property line that simply read, "Private property. Beyond this point, the only authority is my own. Trespassers will be shot and then sued." The petty tyrants had tried to steal my safety and my honor, but all they did was remind me and the world exactly who I was and what I was capable of.